Everyone, I will call this meeting of the Housing Advisory Commission to order. And staff, may we please have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Cantu. Commissioner Marks. Commissioner Ramirez. Present. Commissioner Winkler.
Present.
And Chair Tuneman.
Present. I will now read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. With that, we will move to the approval of minutes. We only have the one item on here, and this is our usual approval of minutes as we did last time. Do we have any comments on the minutes or a motion to approve?
I move to approve. I second.
Moved and seconded. Any comment from any members of the commission? Any comment from public?
If you wish to speak on the minutes, please use the raise a hand icon. No.
Seeing none, let's please move forward with roll call vote.
Commissioner Cantu. That's okay, but you're voting on the minutes. Commissioner Marks. Commissioner Ramirez.
Yes.
Commissioner Winkler.
Yes.
And Chair Tiedemann.
Yes, thank you. With that, we will move to go to the city or public comment for items not on the agenda. This is for any speaker to address the commission on an item that is not otherwise on the agenda but is within our purview, and warning that the Brown Act limits our ability to take up or discuss items substantially that are not on the agenda. Therefore, they may receive a brief answer or be referred to a future agenda. And in all comments, we ask everyone to be respectful to all the other commenters as well as everybody here. Thank you.
If you wish to speak on an item not on the agenda, please come up to the dais or use the raise the hand icon.
Good evening. I just was discussing with a fellow member of the real estate and mortgage community about the new changes in the insurance industry. And I felt that the Housing Advisory Committee should understand and spend a little time understanding what was going on in it. Right now, because of the FAIR Plan is out of money, which is the fallback insurance for all the rental and homeowners properties in commercial properties in the state, there is a plan that going forward in which every single insurance policy will have to pay approximately $60 surcharge to bail out the bankrupt FAIR Plan. I think it behooves this group to learn about it because it's one of those housing costs which is part of being in California right now and may or may not get better with the change in climate. One thing I did find out was that I had previously thought that the state was funding the FAIR Plan and any deficit that would be incurred by them. I was recently told this evening that the FAIR Plan is actually funded by every single insurance carrier in the state, and if they have by the percentage, I guess, of the policies that they cover. So therefore, that's why they are going to ask to get a ability to increase everyone's insurance in order to bail out the FAIR Plan caused this these incredible losses from the wildfires. Someone has to cover this, and I guess it will be all of us. And that would also mean perhaps the tenants would have to pay their fair share of that because everyone's got to pay into this plan, whether they're in a fire risk zone or not. And I hope you learn about this and share your information with the council, because this issue is not going to go away. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any commenters online?
Anyone online wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda, please use the raise the hand icon. And no one wishes to speak.
Thank you. We will close public comment. That brings us to our first substantive item, where we have discussion on the Commission's Guiding Principles in 2025 calendar. And I will turn it over to staff.
All right, good evening, commissioners, members of the public. I'm Leslie Mendez, planning manager. So the Housing Advisory Commission, as you know, was established by the City Council to foster inclusive, collaborative, and consensus-driven discussion and recommendations on housing policy. During the February 2025 meeting, HAC commissioners and members of the public articulated key principles of engagement emphasizing consensus building, evidence-based discussion, transparency, active listening, and a shared commitment to equitable housing solution. This presentation outlines a summary of principles heard and provides a 7-meeting framework for structured examination of the topics set for review for the 2025 calendar, culminating in a final synthesis of priorities and policy recommendations to be presented to the City Council. As HAC begins its work, the following proposed goals are intended to guide, discussions and help shape the Commission's approach to advising the City Council on housing policy and programs. So number 1 is to support implementation of the city's 2023 to 2031 housing element, specifically to refine implementation strategies of rent review, evaluation, and tenant protections that were found in programs 5C and 5D, to promote both housing security and rental stability, balancing tenant protections with a functioning housing market. Number 2 is to serve as a public forum for discussion on housing issues, which is to provide a venue for the community to discuss housing concerns and opportunities, and to strive for consensus-driven recommendations to the extent possible. 3, promote education of both housing providers and renters, educate landlords and tenants on their rights and responsibilities under AB 1482 and related laws, prevent disputes and promote equity through targeted fair housing education. Number 4, recommend policies based on high-quality research around policy recommendations and data, best practices and research, incorporate insights from the 2023 City of Albany Renter Survey, and draw on expertise from housing professionals, academics, community groups, and rental house providers. And number 5 is to evaluate feasibility and the cost benefits of any policy recommendations. That is to balance the cost, challenges, and trade-offs to maximize public resources and ensure policy recommendations are cost-effective, feasible, and sustainable within the City of Albany. So, as outlined in our February meeting, our 2025 HAC meeting calendar is highlighted here. So March was our, which is tonight, is our anti-harassment and discrimination protections. April, we are scheduled to discuss just cause for eviction policies. In May, rent stabilization policies. June will be the review and evaluation of our existing rent review program. July will be considerations of legal assistance for tenants and housing providers. August is a recess. September would be draft recommendations for City Council. October would be to review and refine HAC's policy recommendations, and November would be end of the year review. And there is some time probably built in the end if we have to follow up on other topics. So tonight, staff welcomes any discussion and comment on both the proposed principles, as well as any recommendations you have to this and our work plan presented above. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We'll now turn to questions from commission members. Does anyone have a question they'd like to start us off with?
What sort of work have you done on the anti-harassment? And what was the other? There was a two-part.
I'm sorry, can you
Sorry.
speak? Yeah.
What work has been done on the anti-harassment? And I don't remember what the other part of that question was.
Non-discrimination.
Yes.
That was the staff reports that was presented to you tonight, and that's the work that you will all be discussing tonight.
I looked at the agenda. I must have missed where to click on that. I did not read that, so I wasn't.
Oh, I am so sorry.
My fault.
No, okay. We can maybe, if you can't figure it out, let's schedule a time to
Problem.
do that.
Thought I clicked on the drop-down menus to read everything. I said, okay, it seems pretty simple for tonight, but I wasn't aware of that. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions from committee members? None. One question. So if you could clarify a little of sort of the product of our work, because I want to have us have the right expectations for it. Of at the end of this, the what's passed on to council is sort of a set of policy goals or report or finished ordinances that we're recommending specific action on. If you could give a little more detail of what we should be expecting.
Right. I think that's going to actually be dependent on what comes out of our dare I say, our work sessions. If there I think is consensus and solidity, I think we can move forward with actual ordinances. If there is more kind of general ideas with different thoughts and different procedures, I think that what I anticipate is going to council with kind of a summary of what we've heard, and then come back to the commission kind of phase 2 with the ordinances. And I'm going to think it's going to probably be that way because maybe depending on the recommendations, it will require certain allocations that can only be made by a city council. So it would be, I want to make sure that any ordinances that are recommended are ones that are feasible to our elected officials.
Great, thank you. So that means that for the individual items that we'll be considering in most of these meetings, we should expect something similar to the packet that's attached to tonight's agenda of sort of, at least for this year, of research, background, options, no sort of finished ordinances yet, but maybe in our next work plan.
Exactly. And I think depending on the topic, it might be more, as I mentioned, a little more consolidated or a little more looking for direction from council before we come back.
Great, thank you. Any more questions? Go for it.
Thank you. I do have one more question. I'm wondering about the cost of some of the policies that we'll be reviewing throughout the year, because if that is part of the issue in trying to determine how to move forward, I didn't see, for example, any cost in terms of what it would take to implement this potential anti-harassment, non-discrimination policy. So I'm wondering at what point will we be looking at that, or whether we will be looking at some of that.
I think that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the actual answer. I think a lot of it will be dependent on what, again, is generated from this body. I don't expect that. We will not be discussing costs at the first meetings as we go along, but when we come back towards fall, kind of synthesizing what we've heard, we can start pulling in some costs, because it will take some time. I mean, doing a revision to an ordinance is one thing, setting up a new position and or new databases, that's a different thing. So if that is part of future recommendations, we will be looking into costs of that in terms of both I would say financial as well as human power to implement.
Right, because I think that's going to be key in terms of providing some recommendations for priorities, right? So, I think we have to kind of look at, just like the scope of work says, the cost-benefit analysis.
Right, I agree.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry about that. So I've looked. No problem. I've looked at this, and I do feel that federal and state laws are pretty clear about fair housing and anti-harassment and equal opportunity for housing. I would be very concerned if you start going into the weeds for a problem that may not exist here. Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, major metropolitan areas, hundreds of thousands of residents. You may need to have a greater level of oversight or critiquing of how things are done. I don't know that.
Is this about specifically the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy discussion?
Here, yeah, it's right here where they're quoting
Right.
harassment, and you have various cities that have added.
Yes. We're going to discuss that in more depth after this item and get a presentation, so I might.
All right, I appreciate that, Aaron. I'm concerned that also that with the commissioner's comment about creating a bureaucracy or something that costs so much money that you can't manage it. And until I haven't yet seen that there's a crisis in Albany on housing. I'm in the housing market here every day, and by and large, our residents are really happy. They're enjoying their rentals. They're well maintained. The property owners seem to be.
Commissioner Winkler, could we save this for that item when we get there? That would be great.
Okay.
Yep. And I apologize that you weren't able to access the materials ahead of time.
Seeing no more questions from commissioners, we'll turn to public comment on this item.
So if anyone wishes to speak on the principles of engagement and the calendar, the proposed calendar for this year, please use the raise the hand icon and or come up to the dais.
Good evening. I just want to emphasize that any decisions and policies that you come up with are based on good data and research, rather than just, a few people have followed up on it. I think in the last meeting, it became clear that the rental survey was not a good sample size of the tenant population, so that it's hard to, so the question is, how does you come up with the right data so that you can say, aha, there is an issue here, and this is actually the way a certain percentage of the housing providers are feeling, and as the same thing with the tenants. So please come up with really good methodology for your data. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have anyone online?
Hi, this is Dawn Kawamoto, Albany resident. Yeah, I would like to echo the similar comments made by the previous gentleman, and maybe possibly recommend removing the incorporate insights from the 2023 City of Albany renter survey, since, as I recall from the last meeting, it was only like less than 150 survey participants, and usually you want to aim for 500 or more survey participants to get a really good valid survey, is my recommendation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Do you have any further commenters?
Yep.
As I mentioned before, this is Elaine Stelton, and as I mentioned at the last meeting, I have studied surveys, and generally people who respond have some strong sentiments. They're sort of a self-selecting group. So I also have concerns about the survey, and I think that you shouldn't use it as your guidepost as to what needs to be fixed in Albany. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Oops. So I apologize. I think I lowered someone's hand. who didn't speak, so please raise your hand again if we just heard from Elaine, correct? Yeah, okay. Oops.
Hello, my name is Mike Zojaji. I've spoken at this forum and city council in the past. I've been here for 20 years, and I can say that City of Albany is very unique. It's a very small town with 1 square mile footage. A lot of the times I've heard people compare City of Albany to Berkeley, to Oakland, to El Cerrito and others, and try to use those analogies and follow up similar policies that have been implemented there and trying to implement similar things in Albany. Very similar to the data that was provided last time. We know that it's not that accurate. It's not significant. It's very insignificant in terms of number of data that has been collected. I want to make sure that whatever recommendations that come out of the city is really catered and considered for the City of Albany, that we do not do any copycats from other policies that I see everywhere is essentially copy paste of what has happened elsewhere and try to implement the same thing here. We are not City of Berkeley, we are not City of Oakland, we are not El Cerrito, they are not the city, many other cities that you see around the Bay Area. It's a really small, unique town here, very small, and has its own unique characteristics as well as needs. So I'm hoping that that will be taken into consideration when these policies are implemented or recommended. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
If anyone else wishes to speak, please use the raise the hand icon.
Thank everyone for their comments. We'll bring it back for commission member discussion and comments. And I'll note that I believe this is an action item. We are accepting this tonight, or we are just giving feedback on it?
I would like a formal acceptance.
Yes, that's what I figured. Any discussion on this item?
The education part.
Your mic is not on.
Sorry. The education part, I think that's really important. So I would really like to see the city do education, and I would like to be involved in that. I think, with the housing element and the RENA requirements about how much housing we have to build, where are we going to build that housing? There's not a lot of vacant property in Albany to build that housing. And I think as citizens, years ago, there was a move to build housing on top of Safeway. There was a huge movement against it in the city, and the city backed off, and we didn't do it. But I think we need to look at those things again. People need to be educated that we don't have other places to build housing in this city. I mean, that's just one thing that we need to put out there. But I really like the education piece, and hope that we can do that fairly soon.
I want to confirm that we're talking about the first handout here, which is the survey, the results, and this harassment.
We are talking about the HAC goals and 2025 meeting calendar,
Okay.
which is the first item, the first substantive item on our agenda.
Okay.
Item 5.1.
Okay. So to support the implementation of the housing element, rent review, that's what I'm reading.
Sorry, I can't see what you're reading, but
Is that what I'm reading?
yes,
I have no trouble discussing and supporting that we're going to go through that. When we get to the nitty-gritty, that's when I would like to discuss what the actual policy is. If we're here to say, yes, let's talk about housing policy, yeah, no problem. But I certainly have comments about the implementation.
Great, thank you. Other comments? I'll just say thank you for preparing this. I appreciate it, and it's really, really good to have an agenda to set out when we're going to get to things and lay out our work plan. I think it looks pretty strong and has a pretty substantive set of goals in front of us. If I don't need to add anything to it, that if I wanted to, it does say generally supporting the goals of the housing element. So if, like Margie mentioned, if we wanted to have any sort of discussion of more generalized, things more on the building side of things and building affordable housing, as that is one of the biggest parts, the stuff we're going to be talking about that is the main part of our calendar tends to dominate conversations about housing elements these days, but the lion's share of the document is about planning. And I know there's a planning commission, but if we ever wanted to touch on that or if there ever was a valuable input point for us, I think that could be good. With that, I will look for a motion to accept the goals and 2025 meetings calendar.
I move to accept the goals and calendar for the commission.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Can we move to a roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Cantu. Yes. Commissioner Marks. Commissioner Ramirez. Commissioner Winkler.
Yes.
And Chair Tiedemann.
Yes. Thank you very much to staff for that presentation. We'll move on to our second piece of substantive business, item 5.2, which is our discussion of non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. And I will turn it over to staff for their presentation.
All right, good evening. So this is item 5.2, and it is to discuss non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies for the city of Albany. So the purpose of this discussion is to summarize current federal and state laws on housing discrimination and harassment, to review available data on their prevalence, review provisions that other jurisdictions have included in local tenant protection ordinances, and to discuss the need and options for a local TPO, the Tenant Protection Ordinance, with consideration of enforcement mechanisms and resource availability. Again, as a reminder, Program 5D of Albany's housing element includes the, we can call it a mandate to evaluate tenant protections, including new measures to prevent unfair treatment of tenants, and to consider non-discrimination in anti-harassment ordinance and explore adding local provisions related to these. It also talks about enhancing community education efforts for tenant and housing provider support resources. So, excuse me, California's Fair Employment and Housing Act, or FEPA, and excuse me, I'm in the wrong. Harassment is unwelcome conduct towards a tenant that creates a hostile, intimidating, or offensive environment. Harassment includes threats, intimidation, coercion, or interference with a tenant's housing rights. Federal and state laws protect against harassment on protected characteristics. The prohibition on discrimination and harassment extends to conduct that is based on a perception of someone's protected characteristic, even if incorrect, or the protected characteristic of another person with whom the victim of discrimination or harassment associates. I am sorry, somehow this skipped ahead like 3 slides. I thought there was something wrong. Oh, whatever. So let me go back to discrimination. Discrimination occurs when individuals are treated unfairly in housing transactions based on protected characteristics. The Federal Housing Act protects against discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, and national origin. California expands these protections to also include age, ancestry, gender identity and expression, genetic information, marital status, source of income / employment status, citizen and immigration status, primary language, citizenship, and military or your veteran status. In addition, California expands upon federal protections for religion to more specifically include religious dress and grooming practices, as well as expands on sex and gender to include childbirth, breastfeeding, and related medical conditions. California law also limits when and how and to what extent housing providers can consider someone's criminal history. Property owners may not impose blanket bans on applicants with a criminal record. Instead, landlords must conduct an individualized assessment considering factors like the nature and severity of the offense, the time since the conviction, and its relevance to housing. So here we go. Harassment is the unwelcome conduct towards a tenant that creates a hostile, intimidating, or offensive environment, and includes threats or coercion or interference with the tenant's housing rights. So both federal and California law protect against harassment based on these protected characteristics. And the prohibition on discrimination and harassment, as I mentioned, extends to the conducts that based on a perception of someone's protected characteristics. You don't just need to have it, but if someone assumes you have one and are discriminating based on that, that is illegal. California state law in both the civil and penal code also prohibit general harassment of tenants that is not based on a protected characteristic. It includes willfully depriving tenants of essential services, intimidation, fraud, or interfering with the tenant's rights. So, HUD and, the CRD, the California, let's look at this up. If you know it, please help me here. Here we go, the Housing and Urban Development, the California Civil Rights Department enforce fair housing laws related to discrimination and discriminating harassment based on protected characteristics. General harassment enforcement relies mainly on tenant lawsuits, however, rather than government action. Local fair housing organizations do provide legal aid and mediation services. So just some of the data that is out there, tracking and quantifying housing discrimination and harassment at the local level is challenging due to the limited data collection and reporting mechanisms, the number of agencies responsible for tracking and investigating cases, and confidentiality restrictions that limit access to case data. In addition, many impacted individuals also choose not to report due to fear of retaliation or lack of awareness or distrust in the system. And this further complicates the ability to get good data. The National Fair Housing Alliance, however, in its 2024 Fair Housing Trends Report, and this was linked in your report if you wish to look at it, stated that there were a total of 34,150 discrimination complaints that were filed nationwide in the calendar year 2023. Interesting that 52.6%, or almost 53%, more than half, were related to disability complaints. In 2023, there were 1,521 complaints or harassment reported, which was an increase in over 66% over the previous year. This number represents the highest number of harassment complaints filed since the NFHA began reporting harassment-specific data back in 2006. And at the state level, CRD's 2023 annual report states that the agency investigated 1,254 housing-related complaints in 2023. 52 of those were in Alameda County. And again, disability discrimination was alleged in 59% of those complaints, followed by source of income at 21% and race at 18%. So regionally, the city of Albany participated in a collaboration of jurisdictions within the county of Alameda to analyze impediments to fair housing at a countywide level. And there is a draft County of Alameda 2024 Regional Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing. The collaboration issued a tenant survey requesting information on experiences related to discrimination and harassment. Of the 1,634 respondents of the Fair Housing Survey, 28% said they had experienced housing discrimination in the process of finding housing, with a basis in race or ethnicity reported in 17% of those, and use of public assistance funds reported by 9%. Among respondents with a housing voucher of any kind, which were a total of 128 respondents, 42% reported it was somewhat difficult to find a property owner to accept the voucher, and 34% reported it was very difficult. And as we mentioned last meeting, the 2023, our staff administered its own Albany-wide cities tenant survey. And of the 178 respondents, in the question regarding negative experience to housing issues, less than 5% or only 8 respondents indicate experiences with discrimination or harassment in securing or keeping housing. So, for all the listeners out there, including the commissioners, it wants to be noted that both the Alameda County Survey, Regional Survey, and the city's local survey are not designed to be specific, scientific or representative studies. However, they are an opportunity for respondents to share experiences in the rental market. So, although the extent of housing discrimination and harassment is largely unknown, the data shows it does exist, and state laws do provide a baseline of protection, which many jurisdictions rely, including the city of Albany. Certain local governments, however, have adopted additional measures to address and prevent discrimination and harassment within their jurisdictions through local tenant protection ordinances, or TPOs. So the information that I'll be providing is based on our look at the TPOs of the cities of Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. So in terms of local measures adopted, over and above state law in regards to jurisdiction, one was to protect non-nuclear families, including consensual non-monogamous relationships, as well as multi-parent families, step families, multi-generational households, and asexual relationships. And both Oakland and Berkeley have this provision in their local ordinance. Another one is to prohibit property owners from inquiring about an applicant's criminal history in the application process, sometimes called ban the box, which is the box you'd have to check in your application for housing if you have a criminal history. And the intent is to promote access to housing for individuals with prior convictions. And this is, as previously mentioned, an extension of state law which prohibits the blanket policies against denying a tenancy to individuals with any conviction. And the city of Oakland has this provision. Local measures regarding harassment are, a lot of them are, very honestly, a little redundant to existing state law. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a clarification, and some are expansion. So these are just a sampling of ones that are included in local tenant protection ordinances. And that's threatening to report a tenant to immigration authorities or ICE, refusing to accept rent, delay in cashing a rent check for more than 30 days, or acknowledging a receipt of a rent check, charging excessive late fees, retaliating against tenants for organizing or forming tenant associations, forcing a tenant to vacate and re-register to avoid tenant protections, and engage a tenant in human trafficking as a condition of occupancy. I think that's quite extreme, but I just wanted to put it in there because it is unique from our neighbor to the south. And then in terms of enforcement, this just gives a little, there are the different jurisdictions do address enforcement. They range sort of the gamut, where the Los Angeles Housing Department actually investigate tenant harassment complaints and issue citations or penalties, but tenants still need to file civil lawsuits for most remedies. San Francisco Rent Board provides mediation for tenant complaints. It does not issue penalties or fines, and tenants must sue in civil court for damages. The Oakland Rent Adjustment Program can investigate claims and issue warnings, but enforcement relies on tenants suing property owners. And the Berkeley Rent Board can assist tenants with legal guidance, but direct enforcement is limited. And I think part of this is to highlight that even only the largest city, Los Angeles, has anything of a real enforcement program with teeth. So for next steps, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is understanding existing state non-discrimination and anti-harassment laws, existing data on discrimination and harassment cases, as well as additional provisions adopted by local jurisdictions. Staff is seeking feedback from the commission and the public on whether conditions exist within the city that warrant consideration of additional local protections, what those protections could or should include, and provide feedback on the priority of recommended measures to ensure a balance between policy impact and cost to the taxpayer, housing providers, and ultimately the tenants. And then through the discussion, staff does hope that HAC begins to formulate a recommendation to City Council on these actions. And that concludes my presentation, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We will turn to commission questions. I'll ask us to hold questions for now, and then we'll get to full deliberation after we take public comment. Are there any questions from the commissioners?
I do have a question. So the rent review program that we have currently, and I understand it is administered by the ECHO housing program, to what extent does it cover, some of this, issues regarding discrimination and that sort of stuff?
So the actual contract we have with ECHO Housing is for administrating our rent review program, which is related to requests if there's a rate increase of more than 5%, you can bring it to up for mediation and conciliation. However, ECHO Housing does, just through that process, end up doing a lot of counseling of tenants and, working with landlords. So we do get a certain amount of counseling related to fair housing issues through ECHO, but it isn't yet a formal program. Yes.
Just curious, how many times has the rent review been used in the last 12 months?
That I don't know, but we will go into more detail on the rent review program when we get to that item.
I was just curious because
Yeah, I would tell you if I knew it off the top of my head.
Seeing no further questions, we will go to public comment.
Thank you. Could you bring up the slide again about the number of harassment complaints in Alameda County in 2023? I think it was something like 52. And
It is 52 were reported.
Right, and so that's quite, so we have a survey that says a tenant might have said that they were harassed, which I understand that they might have a feeling of that, but that doesn't mean that it was anything rose to a level of that would require action or civil action, because I would assume they didn't make a complaint about it. Otherwise, is there a way for us to get the data on the number of harassments that were filed, complaints that were filed, not in Alameda County, but in the city of Albany, which is a very, if it's 52, then maybe I don't have the percentage of Albany as part of the entire county, but I would say it's a pretty small percentage, and that maybe the number of complaints was a couple or less. Is there a way to get that data? I'd like to.
Why don't you finish with your public comment, and then we'll answer questions after.
Thank you for your comment.
Any other, please use the raise the hand icon.
Mike Shiraji again. I'm an immigrant to the United States from Iran, came here, and at a very young age, I did face discrimination, very apparent overtly, some covert, and having lived here for a number of decades, I can still say it does exist at workplace and elsewhere. It's just a little bit covert. So I do understand the concept behind anti-discrimination. I grew up and spent times with many other friends from different parts of the world who've come in, different race, different ethnicities, locally here in America too, a lot of African-American friends, and we share some commonality there. It's a very, in terms of the discrimination, I looked at the slide number 8. You had mentioned, I think the stats you had about eight respondents out of 187 commented on discrimination, harassment. That's a really small number, and you will see much larger numbers in Alameda County. Again, that's also not surprising. So when I said earlier that we should consider what is specific to Albany, this data is actually kind of relevant in the sense that it seems to indicate it's a smaller number. We can discuss why that's the case, economic reasons and other. So that should be considered. The second thing, I'm always in favor of rules against discrimination, harassment, but I always worry about monumental bureaucracy. A lot of rules exist which has benefited me at the federal level, state level, and I'm concerned that we're going to add additional bureaucracy, rules, regulation on top of what's existing. So I warn caution not to go overboard on this. It's so easy to adopt I see a number of slides from other cities and adopt everything that's there, or some of the things that are there just seems out of this, not so relevant, not so critical to the city of Albany, and not blindly adopt things just to say that we've done it, we've done a good job, we pat ourselves in the back, tell our friends, tell people in future when we run for office, say, hey, look what I've done. Really be truthful, be honest with what's available, and come up with minimal bureaucracy and tackle this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Susan. I'm a veteran, disabled veteran from the military. And I'm curious about what kind of guardrails we put in place to hold landlords accountable of these non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. I live in Albany, and I am currently receiving rental assistance from a veterans organization. And because they pay a portion of my rent and I pay a portion of my rent, I'm kind of locked in. And my landlord has managed to get away with not heating my apartment this entire winter, nor fixing my hot water in my tub when it went out. So I'm living in they're not good living situation, but because of the help I'm getting from a veterans organization, I feel like they're taking advantage of me because they'll get their money no matter what. And I have to be careful about what buttons I push to not get kicked out, or it's a precarious situation to be in. And I find it unfair and no way to treat somebody who was willing to die for this country. And I just wonder if we adopt some of these policies, how landlords will be held accountable without me having to go into my pocket to sue somebody for not heating my apartment or not providing hot water. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, this is Dawn Kalmoto, and Susan, I'm absolutely appalled, and thank you very much for your service. My husband is also a disabled veteran as well. I am also a minority, and I also, like the previous speaker, have faced discrimination because of my race. I am a landlord, and my only request is, again, going back to maybe redoing the amount of people who are surveyed for harassment is very low. And I am curious if there's any way to get a survey of at least 500 people to see where the harassment figures go. You know, if it still stays at 5% for harassment, that is a low figure. And as Commissioner Ramirez indicated, we do need to look at the cost, the return on investment for the expense. But I would be curious about maybe redoing that survey just to see where all the figures go, you know, redoing that rental survey, but aiming to get a much higher participation because, you know, ideally you need 500 or more to be of some significance. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
If anyone else wishes to speak, please use the raise the hand icon. No one else wishes to speak.
Thank everyone for their comments. We'll bring it back for deliberation from the commission members. And before we get started, just to clarify with staff, our goal tonight, we don't need to hammer out an exact recommendation that gets voted on. This is for us to provide feedback and our general thoughts and discussion, correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll open it up to discussion. Vice Chair?
I actually have another follow-up question. I was wondering, what is the process for somebody who brings up a complaint of, discrimination or harassment currently in the city of Albany? If that happens,
So the city of Albany does not enforce fair housing complaints, actually any housing complaints, if it's not related to anything in our civil code. So we would refer them to the appropriate agency. So again, if it's harassment based on discrimination, which would be, as one of our callers had, which is unfortunate based on source of income, that is handled by the California Department of Civil Rights. So not super satisfying, perhaps, but there are local organizations out there that can help with some guidance and perhaps advice. So part of the education campaign, both for tenants, but also for housing providers too, because I think, well, I don't know this, but assume positive intent. I don't think, sometimes people do things without realizing they're doing it or that it is not correct. And so the more education that we all can put out as a city to educate on, the rights and wrongs and the yeses and the nos, I think will be helpful for all. But to answer your question, it would not be the city, it would be the state and or civil litigation.
another question. So if we were to, if the city of Albany were to adopt any additional, policies on anti-harassment and non-discrimination, would it then have to be basically include some budget for the actual implementation of it?
So that ranges the gamut, as you saw from the examples from Los Angeles down to Berkeley. So we can have an ordinance that, has 100 things in it, but it may just default to civil a civil matter that it has to go to litigation, as opposed to Los Angeles was the one jurisdiction that we looked at that actually has its own kind of enforcement mechanism with civil fines and enforcement.
But you still need to, in the end, sue in civil court. They only fine and they only pretty much admonish people.
Okay.
So there's no other than that, and the fines are pretty much insignificant. So.
Good to know. So again, to answer your question, that could be a local tenant protection ordinance can include additional measures, and in terms of like we're also calling this harassment, or we're adding a protected category that we think is important for the city of Albany. And it could also include a range of administrative citation and enforcement measures depending on recommendation and ultimately city council decision.
First, I'd like to thank the speaker who was a disabled vet for their service. We're an all-volunteer military, and it's amazing that people do that, and thank you for your service. It is in the law today that you have to have a habitability standard. I believe there are tenant defense councils and East Bay law centers that this resident could contact, and they could write just a letter to the landlord, and I bet you the owner will jump on it because they would want to avoid litigation. But there's a duty of habitability that is already implied beyond adding the TPO or anything else to it, that she has the right to hot water and she has the right to heat, and she has an ability to enforce it with free legal help from the East Bay Law Center, the tenant protection groups, et cetera. That exists already, and tenants can avail themselves. And I urge you, the speaker, to avail yourself of that if your property owner is not giving you heat. That is completely incorrect. Overarchingly, I watched the tenant protection ordinances get passed in Oakland, and it just put a bigger and bigger target on property owners' backs. And it is what precipitated my sale of properties in Oakland and eventually moving the assets out of the state of California because the regulations got so intense. They keep adding to it. It doesn't just stop at one thing, and it made no sense to take the risk. The penalties that were imposed by the city of Oakland and what the tenant attorneys could extract out of property owners were incredible. I have a friend of mine who just paid $130,000 to get a guy out of a one-bedroom apartment who hadn't paid rent in 2 years. It's egregious, and you add these rules, it really tips the scales. I don't know that you have a crisis here yet. I certainly think that the state and federal laws are there, and I think availing residents to services that are currently in place to handle things like heat, et cetera, is a good idea. Your rent mediation is another aspect of trying to find a common ground between owners and residents, and I think that's really the direction that I would urge you to go. These TPOs get unwieldy and out of hand, in my opinion, and I can drill down more on it if you'd like, but I don't know how to do that necessarily right now.
Can I add one thing? Thank you, Commissioner Winkler. For the speakers, but also for you all, we did have 2 attachments here that the first one was federal and state housing legislation and the enforcing agencies. So that describes who enforces the various levels of discrimination and harassment. The second are fair housing supporting agents, tenants, and property owners. So it is a list of local organizations that do help and do counsel tenants and property housing providers on tenant issues. And so should have brought this up in my presentation, so apologies for the postscript. But as we move forward, I am hoping to build these resources. They are out there, but if we can consolidate it so that the more it becomes easily accessible to our community, I think will be helpful for all. So thank you for that postscript. And you are part of the team, so it's what you all come up with. So.
And thank you for flagging that. I was going to do that myself, so thank you for preempting me. Other comments?
Yes. Under the non-discrimination, in the housing element, on page 646, it says well, first of all, let me just tell you a story that I heard. Someone that went to see an apartment in Albany, a person of color, actually the person is an elected city person, went to see an apartment, and when the landlord saw them there was another couple that came to see the apartment, and even though the person of color had the first appointment, the landlord took the white couple, they appeared to be white, first. And this person obviously felt that that was discrimination, but she didn't complain to anyone. I mean, people just generally don't complain. It's just, what would that benefit her? But in the housing element, it says on page 646 that the city would work with Echo Housing to consider fair housing testing. So 'cause I think that's the only way we're really going to know in Albany if there's a problem. Really, I know of one story, but there may be others out there. Is there any way we could find out how much Echo Housing would charge the city to do a fair housing study and find out exactly what's going on in the fair housing? So that's one thing I want to say. The other thing is, I've talked to a lot of tenants, and they are afraid. They have a lot of problems in where they live. When they speak to their landlord, the landlord threatens to raise the rent if they complain or kick them out. I know we're not proud of the survey here, but in the renter survey, well, first of all, according to the housing element, 50% of Albany's housing stock is more than 70 years old. And according to the renter survey, only 21% of renters rated their housing as excellent. The rest of them was poor, fair, or good. Then under the same survey, it says additional items that they would like from the city. And the first was rent control, but the second one is repairs and habitability. And I have just heard this from so many renters, and they're afraid to come forward. They're afraid to speak up. I'm glad the person called in and spoke up. I would imagine she's probably afraid to go directly to the landlord and even to complain, because the landlord gets a letter about her, then she doesn't know if the landlord's going to retaliate. There needs to be, I think, some non-retaliation clause against tenants, like the veteran who would go and make a complaint.
Other comments?
Well, I believe that kind of supports what Commissioner Winkler was saying in terms of mediation. And I think one thing we do not do at all very well, I've been here as a renter, not as a homeowner, but as a renter. I don't know of anything in terms of what I can do if something happens to me, if I'm discriminated or anything. Outside of going to the state, which is sort of like that pie in the sky, or suing somebody. And how can I sue anybody when I'm spending over 40% of my income on rent? I mean, I agree. I don't think there are tremendous problems here in Albany, just for the fact that one of the reasons that I moved here was because it was expensive. The schools are great. And so there's this sort of ability to kind of weed certain people out. And that continues to happen. Gentrification is something that is real. Today, I drove to my apartment, it's a condo, and the owner had my garage open and was parking his motorcycle inside there. And I was like, sir, you need to let me know before you open up my garage. And I told him very, very clearly, if you ask me to go into my garage or into my home, I will always say yes. But how do you, oh, well, I'm the owner, he said. So I understand, and I really want to be as objective as possible, but the power, and I feel for your friends who have spent $130,000, and I've heard of those horror stories. But on the whole, I feel like there are more people who have less power and who are just afraid to say anything or don't know where to go for the help. And I think that as a city of Albany, I really feel like we care about people. It's a little bit different. I really feel that we can do something major here in terms of not only educating the renters, but also the homeowners, and bringing us together in terms of just mediation. Let's get something done that way.
Let me share with you that. So everything that I'm hearing here tonight, we manage almost 250 units in my company as a property manager. We would never allow these things to happen, going into your garage, her heat not working. Sure. We are on this stuff like immediately because we are terrified of getting sued because the tenants can get free legal advice. We can't. I have to pay for lawyers when I'm defending myself in something, and I haven't had to, but I would have to pay. I've done one eviction in 36 years of property ownership. The tenants can get free legal services from the East Bay Law Center. They are paid for by our tax dollars. The City of Oakland had a $600,000 line item in 2021 that they gave to their attorneys to defend tenants. So the services exist. Your landlord should never have gone into your garage. That is 100% wrong. I am shocked that's happening. So maybe it's about education more than creating rules that then create punishments that then create fines. I can only tell you, like, I'll give you a quick story in Oakland. If I go in to fix residents' garbage disposal, and he's home, and suddenly there's a woman there that he's now living with. He doesn't have to tell me anything about her. She doesn't have to fill out an application. She gets to stay. I collect the rent, she stays. They get into a fight, he leaves. She's my new resident, and I know nothing about her. And you just lose control over the properties. And another point, you talked about how the average housing stock is over 70 years old. So those houses cost way more to maintain than new houses. And if you cap or start, with all the costs that owners have, my property insurance has gone up 300% on all the rentals. There's no line item for me to say, okay, I can pass through to the resident X number of dollars. It's very hard. And once you start regulating a market so much, you've got to regulate the roofer, the sheetrocker, the plumber, the electrician, everybody else, because you can't regulate one aspect and not regulate the rest, because it puts a lot of pressure on the person that it is in the regulated environment. It's just an opinion. I'm here to share it and to talk about what's going on. That's what I see. That's my experience.
I appreciate what you're saying in terms of renters like myself being able to go and get free legal advice. But I would ask those same lawyers if they feel that they are overtaxed, if they're underpaid, if they have too many clients, and how well they really are able to do their job.
Pretty effective from what I have seen.
Well, I think part of it, though, too, is just like you said, like you said, you take care of your business.
I would be terrified of getting it.
And you prefer, hey, if it's easier for me to fix something than it is to go to court. But not all homeowners are as just as you are.
I'm not trying to say this from a point of being just. It is the law, and if a homeowner, if this property owner is not fixing her heat, he is in violation of that law. He won't survive that court thing. He will be forced to get it fixed. It's education as to what is available to the residents and to the owners on what their responsibilities are. Maybe the best place to focus the attention is educating everybody about, hey, this is how it works. You have a problem with Dan Winkler, go to the East Bay Law Center. You have a problem with a resident not paying, you have to follow these rules.
Well, I think that we don't even need to go so far as suing somebody. I think what the commissioner was saying in terms of educating people, renters and homeowners. Yes. And I understand. Being a homeowner is very, very difficult. My parents own a home. Some friends own a home. Right now, every time I open up my Google News feed, some insurance companies raising their rates. It's horrible.
That's an excellent example, Noel. The insurance market. We tried to regulate the insurance market 20, 30 years ago. And we're paying for that today because the increases were so low that suddenly the insurance companies couldn't make a profit, and they left. They could leave. I can't take my buildings out, right?
Right.
They left. Insurance costs escalated. Francesco brought up the issue about the FAIR Plan. I had talked about this 2 years ago at our office meeting. I said this FAIR Plan is becoming the primary insurer in California, and soon there's going to be a FAIR Plan tax on your paycheck because they're going to run out of money because there's not enough. It costs so much. People don't want to understand that. Insurance costs have gone nuts, and we tried to regulate the market, and they left. Now we're trying to open it up. Commissioner Lara is trying to let people pass through 20%, 30% increases. They have to do that in order to get insurance companies back so you get competition.
Sure.
Want to bring in our other members? I saw them hovering above their mics. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo some of the comments that the commissioners have made around the importance of education. I do wonder if there are some gaps around the anti-harassment and non-discrimination that might still be worth looking at. It is. Just because there hasn't been official or legal complaints doesn't mean that there isn't out there, just like you indicated in your report. So I do worry about that. It's a little bit hard to make a real good assessment, given it's almost like I need maybe a matrix or a spreadsheet or a table that tells me where are the some of the most glaring gaps. I mean, just what really stood out to me was this discrimination. I guess policy or coverage from Oakland and Berkeley around non-nuclear families. I do wonder if the Fair Housing Act covers some of that through its through its non-discrimination of familial status. But I think more and more we're going to see, because of the really high cost of housing, we're going to see those multi-parent families, those multi-generational, and so I think it's important to consider those potential areas where there could be. Some discrimination. Again, just because there isn't right now, some people are afraid. Some people just don't know. I mean, you just have a lot of challenges in being able to know what your rights are and being able to enforce it. If somebody's struggling with paying their rent, they're not going to have the time to, argue something that is really affecting their housing situation. So. I don't have a specific recommendation, but I do think that the education part is an important element. I would love to be able to look at enforcement, but I understand that could be costly. And I would want to know, what the city of Albany will have to give up in order to be able to enforce some of those things. So I don't know, that's the difficulty in all of this.
Yes, I have one more comment. When you mentioned mediation, that's a possibility. And I know we're going to be talking about the rent review program, but if you look in the housing element from the new one, it lists what happened with the rent review program in Albany and the mediation that was non-binding on landlords. And it says right in the housing element, of the 17 cases that went to mediation, 0 had a satisfactory outcome. This was with the landlord having to voluntarily agree to whatever was said or whatever. 0 had had a good outcome. So I mean, to me, that's an indication of how the landlords are going to act. If going to the actual mediation and we can't get one case that had a good outcome, that's really discouraging and really doesn't make me feel good about the landlords being told to do anything voluntarily.
So I will add a couple thoughts of, I think, like many of the members of the commission have touched on, and like we heard in public comment, I think it's very important to be aware in terms of this policy, more so than I think almost any other that we're going to discuss, that the people most likely to need the protections of this policy of anti-harassment and non-discrimination anywhere are the people who are least likely to have the resources to file a civil suit, and are going to be the most scared and unable to do something to report it because they have a special situation where they're receiving some rental assistance that they're very scared to lose because they are living far below the poverty line. And if they lose their housing situation, even if it has huge problems with it, then they are going to be out on the street. Or especially because if they are immigrants with a less than secure immigration status, which includes more people now than it did a couple years ago, then they are incredibly scared of any retaliation that could happen. And I have heard countless stories about this from tenants in work on these topics. These are people who often are not able to report or have the resources to follow up on these actions. So that is why it is really important, and why I don't think it is a good starting point to say, well, we probably don't have a problem with this here. I think everywhere has a problem with these issues. And the existing policy, while broad, is not deep. I would also say that it is possible to do this. This is, of the items on our agenda, possibly some of the lower hanging fruit in terms of cost and administrative burden. As we heard in the staff report, there are very few cities that have a huge amount of full-time equivalent hours of personnel and funding invested in enforcing these actions. I don't think Albany is going to be able to have a huge enforcement action as a city of our size, but we can have a strong policy that says what is and isn't allowed and plugs some of the gaps that are in existing law and gives a little more a couple more tools in the tool belt of people who have had their rights violated as part of this and who feel scared as a result of that. I think that is a pretty low administrative cost. We can have a policy, and I think it's important to have some tools on the city's side, but it doesn't need to be exhaustive. I would reference as a model for what we might consider, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, came out with the transit-oriented communities guidelines, which includes several policies around protection policies for renters. That has a model of some of the most common things to plug, and I think it's a very good baseline for passing on a local level. It includes defining some more anti-harassment standards around, not harassing tenants for organizing, not refusing to acknowledge receipt of rent, not asking for or reporting documentation status, but also really importantly, it establishes penalties including violating that ordinance being an affirmative defense for a tenant in an eviction proceeding, which again, that is not a thing that requires a lot of administrative burden or bureaucracy or cost on the city to work with, but it makes it so that tenants have a tool if their rights are being violated in this way and they are evicted, they have a defense to that they can use. Lastly, I'll just mention that I think naturally we got into a little bit of discussion around legal assistance, which is on our agenda for a later meeting. So I think that is an important one to dovetail with this conversation around what resources people have, because some of these things will rely on people themselves. And that is the sad reality of if we had infinite money in the city and infinite ability to hire staff, we could do everything, but we certainly do not. Any other discussion points?
I would like to summarize what I heard, just to make sure, both from the commission as well as from members of the public. One, I did hear a lot about surveys and getting more surveys and getting better data. I'm going to actually respond to that first, which is the survey the city put out was out for a long time. We announced it in several modes and means. We're out at the Solano Stroll, had it at the senior center, at the library, the survey, and we got the results that we did. So I am not sure that having 500 folks respond or 2 folks is really the crux of the matter. As a lot of folks have also mentioned, it's self-reported. Some people have said, oh, you can do it 5 times and whatever. It is what it is. It's supposed to be a snapshot. So I want to, I think we should move forward not with the assumption of whether there's discrimination and harassment in Albany. Just the same, like if there's crime laws, it's not like, do we need to have anti-crime laws if we don't have murder? The thing is, there's just certain, it's more of a benchmark. Like, we don't want to go below here. It's not to say we are going below here, but we don't. So if we can focus on that, I think as Chair Tiedemann mentioned, what are the gaps, if any, in state law? Because we can just focus on state law since it's more comprehensive than federal law. And you mentioned some suggestions that were from the MTC transit-oriented community guidelines, so we'll look into that. I've heard from pretty much across the board, education and mediation as any part or parcel of a recommendation. And in addition to that, I've heard just a lot of cross-referencing to other. This is a complicated topic, and we are trying to segment it, but I appreciate that one thing leads to the other. So there is some cross-referencing. I'm focusing on anti-harassment and non-discrimination right now, and everything that was said is relevant to this commission, so thank you. So that is what I heard. So let me know if there's something globally that I missed there.
Seeing no comments, I think that sounds like a good summary to me. Any other further last comments on this item? And not last forever, as we will probably revisit it as part of our policy recommendations eventually. Go ahead.
Just curious, and this may not be on topic, and just stop me if I am, but I pay business license taxes for my apartments in Albany, right? Every year. So with that, you're collecting data that I own rentals. Would you not be able to then send with that, hey, these are the rules and habitability, and could you not use that as an opportunity to educate the property owners on what their responsibilities are to maintain the property? And maybe there is something that could be on the leases that says, hey, if you have a grievance, you can go to the East Bay Law Center. I'm just trying to find a solution to getting that out there so that people realize what they are. They don't have to pay for litigation. They really can get a free lawyer. They're not, if they want to bring a suit against the property owner, they can do so. The East Bay Law Center, if it's valid, will take the case. I've seen it. I know it occurs. So it's available to the tenants that are renting properties. So, all right.
So I thank you for that suggestion, and that will be part of our whole education and how we can, as a city, be better at that dissemination of information, tenants' rights, housing providers' rights, because it's clear from the comments that lack of education and maybe access to information is there. So
I would like to bring up one other issue. I'm so glad that you pay your taxes. I understand, though, that there's 25% of the landlords in Albany that haven't even registered their properties. So, that's a problem there. 25% is a big number. So, that we need to do something about that also.
I agree with you. I think everybody that owns a rental should be filing those taxes. I'm not against it. And so if we know there's 25%, we must have the addresses somewhere. So we should do some door knocking and collect the funds.
Yes.
Before we get too much into this, which is, I think, a little off topic, I'm wary of the Brown Act. Any final further thoughts? Seeing none, staff, thank you for the presentation. Hopefully we gave you a lot to chew on and bring back for us for a final recommendation at some point in the future.
definitely, thanks to all.
With that, we will close that item and bring us to announcements from staff and commission members. Do we have any announcements? Seeing none. We will move to our next meeting will be on April 2nd, same time, same place. And with that, thank you to all of our commission members, all the members of the public who participated, and of course, our staff for single-handedly clerking and running this meeting and presenting everything. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all.